everyone. I'm Liz Green with the Cyber Guild. I'm really excited to be here today and chat with you all. And also, I really wanted to welcome Claudia and Devin. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about neuroinclusion at work and for helping us begin to break through the stereotypes around it. Claudia, do you have any recommendations for the team member who's trying to figure out the best way to work in a team, say, where there's differences in communication? So, it could be that you're not neurodivergent and other team members you feel like don't get you, or flip it around and maybe you see yourself as more neurotypical and you're not understanding why certain people are acting or reacting differently.
Yeah, it helps to practice compassion. Right now we're so business focused and profitability and all that kind of stuff, but some people are going through stuff, and we need to take the time and understand what's behind the behaviors. People behave certain ways for a reason, and it's not always personal, and it's usually not personal, Yeah. So when somebody is experiencing stress, they can present that stress either outwardly through like what's perceived as aggression or defiance or disrespect or blame and stuff like that. They could also present that inwardly as negative self-talk, anxiety, low self-esteem and stuff. And then there's the numbing response too, of not only drugs and alcohol, but also sugar and electronics and all of that kind of stuff that distracts from so not only is the person distracting themselves from the problem, other people, if they don't understand what's going on too, and are adding pressure on top of that, it's not a good mix, Yeah. So I would like to see a shift from the burden of care falling on the individual to, a trauma-informed, healing-centered community support, where we can have a open discussion about mental health and normalize that conversation, so what's going on, I noticed this and that. And then when the person, if they're open to it or whatever, respond with some support versus don't tell anybody what to think or how to act or things like that, listen non-judgmentally. And if there's something you don't quite understand, like why they're feeling the way they do or behaving the way they do, be curious, ask questions.
Yeah, so management practices for neurodiversity are just good management practices in general, in my opinion. First, assuming positive intent is really important. Claudia kind of touched on that. I've never met a single human being who is like, I want to be terrible at my job and I want to make everybody upset, right? I've met people who are disgruntled and they outwardly express, being disgruntled, but I've never met anybody who's like, my goal is to just, make this place miserable and get fired. Like, that's what I want to do. Being kinder than necessary, I think, is really important. And, that curiosity, something I like to tack onto that I've learned from parenting is making performance issues about the action or the outcome and not the person, right? Like, you are really sucking at your job right now is making it about the person, but saying like, hey, I've noticed you've been missing some deadlines. Can you talk to me about like what's been getting in your way? Makes it about the outcome or action that you're trying to measure. And it removes a lot of the passion and guilt associated with that. I think that's just a good management practice in general. But then things like making sure objectives are written down, that there's clear alignment on what needs to be done, and that you're not shifting goalposts unnecessarily halfway through a project. That clear communication is extremely important for different types of neurodivergence. And I think it helps all team members to have a clear project plan or reminders of like what the goals are, and continual check-ins like, hey, if you're at 110% capacity, that's not good. How can we get rid of that 10% capacity, or what can we do to mitigate that? Some of my best managers have not necessarily focused on neurodivergence. They just focused on being good managers.
Let's start with the interview process. First of all, it helps to have a diverse panel of interviewers, as well as a diverse group of candidates to the talent pool, and the talent pool that exists in the company too. So keep in mind, what's the mix that you currently have? What's the mix of candidates that you're looking at? And who are the interviewers asking the questions, you know? Encourage having virtual backgrounds, you know, just like Devin and I have virtual backgrounds right now that's like blank. So nobody can judge based on what they see behind you, and make assumptions of who you are, you know? If possible, send the questions in advance so that the person has more time to review and prepare and stuff. For that, as a person with ADHD, it helps me to, you know, sort out my own thoughts in my brain of how I want to respond so that it's more coherent than doing it on a fly. And then instead of closed questions, ask open, you know, hypothetical questions that allow some creativity in the response. And then when you're wrapping up the interview, maybe offer some of the accommodations that are available if they do get hired, and then send a post survey on the interview process to get some feedback back. And then some things that are exclusive, I mean, like not inclusive in the interview, would be like expect certain expectations around professionalism, like, oh, the person's not making eye contact, so that's not good, you know, or you have to be poised. I mean, what does poised mean, you know? Discouraging somebody from stimming, you know, or focusing too much on shared interest or likability or somebody's salary history, or requirements and stuff like that. All of that kind of stuff, I mean, it's not as important as like the responsibilities, how would the person tackle things or stuff like that. And leave the questions spontaneous, you know. No, I mean, don't leave. We're talking about exclusive stuff. Don't have spontaneous questions, you know. Ask this, follow the same process for every candidate so that you're not steering each candidate one way or another, you know. Avoid jargon, idioms, gendered language, person first language. And then when you're making the hiring decisions, make sure you allow enough time to reflect and find the right candidate, and don't rush it. Don't have a firm set deadline that we need to get this done by a certain date, you know, if you don't find the right person yet. Now, as far as accessibility, some of the things that are good to do for accessibility would be sending meeting materials in advance, having frequent breaks, having different ways of communicating, like when you have a web conference, you can talk live or you can chat, and then have closed captioning, recordings, transcripts, text to speech. Make sure that on your websites and stuff, you have simple colors, but also contrast, you know, because you have people with low vision, and then you have people with autism who don't like too much colors, bright colors and stuff like that. Have your buttons be descriptive. Don't say click here, you know, let them know what the button will do when you click here.
It's great advice. I was going to add one thing that I've heard about as a best practice related to hiring is kind of thinking about the kinds of skills that are needed for the job. And, you know, if the person, say, isn't very client or customer facing, and so the idea of talking can be very stressful, like with an interview panel, if they could showcase their skills as an alternative, I see that as something that could be more inclusive. But Devin, I wanted to know from you too, just moving, you know, into thinking about retention, because so much of the energy is around recruitment and hiring, which retention then really correlates with creating and cultivating equitable and inclusive workplaces where people can innovate. What do you see working well in terms of retaining neurodivergent team members? And then what do you see as opportunities that could improve retention rates?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is where, you know, just talking to my associates in the industry, I've seen these initiatives fall flat. There's so much resources and energy and attention given to the recruitment process and being inclusive during that process. And then once you're onboarded, it's not embedded into the culture of the organization. And, you know, a year or two in, that person will wash out, and it's a tragedy when that happens. Because there's usually negative blood on either side of that relationship due to performance issues or due to just feeling like they were misled and led into an organization that didn't account for who they were. I think that a strong DIBS program encompasses a lot of this, right? So I think the biggest thing is making sure that your entire management staff has training and frequent refreshes on diversity and inclusion. I think a strong company culture is, a huge tide against anything negative, right? Making sure that your company, if they have a charter or vision or mission, it's not just something nice on paper to show investors and the board, it's something that your company lives, right? So duo security, I always go back to is like, be kinder than necessary, assume positive intent, and make great things together. Super important. I know that it's very popular now to have employee assistance programs, and those can be extremely helpful. But I've seen organizations that they purchase the ability for their employees to go to an employee assistance program, and then they don't share that with anybody, or it's not put out, or people think it's a remediation thing. If you go to employee assistance, it's something that only happens after a performance plan, right? And I think it's really good at that management layer to encourage, like, hey, I noticed you've really been struggling lately. I know we've been asking a lot of you, did you know you have some free mental health counseling if that's something you're interested in? Or have you thought about, this wellness option we offer? That's just great management. And it's really at your management layer that you're going to retain your people. So making sure your managers are equipped to handle any type of diversity, including neurodiversity, is the best thing you can do.
That's great. Great advice. Well put. So, and Claudia, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree that performative allyship doesn't help. We have to follow up with action, and there's self-advocacy, and then there's advocacy from allies and stuff. So for most people will experience disabilities at some point in their lives, especially as we age. So if we redesign the world with all needs in mind, it helps everybody feel less in need of accommodations, less broken.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think really, to me, what it circles back to is where people seem to get in trouble is to make assumptions. So like you talked about your brain and how you perform best, but it doesn't mean that any manager should say, oh, well, that's what I heard that she said is neuro-inclusive, so I'm going to do that for everyone. The important thing is that you felt safe enough to ask for what you needed, and you did. So that's great. So thank you so much to both of you for participating. This was a really interesting and enlightening conversation, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It was great being here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.